Hi, everybody. If you're in already, we're just waiting for Zoom to get the rest of the folks who have joined into the room, and we will start in just a minute as soon as that happens. All right, it looks like all the folks that were in our waiting room are now in, and so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Good morning, everybody. I'm Lauren Peretti from Housing Innovations, and I'm joined this morning by my colleague, Shannon Quinn-Sheeran.
Good morning.
Also from Housing Innovations. And for anybody that's new to the CoC and doesn't know, we're the consultants both for the Connecticut Balance of State Continuum of Care as well as for DMIS for the statewide Continuum of Care Rental Assistance Monitoring Initiative. So we're here this morning to talk about those two monitoring initiatives and to talk to you guys about a new tool that we have developed to hopefully make it easier for you guys to keep track of what documents are required in all of your CoC participant charts. So just wanted to start with that to make sure that you're in the right place. But before we jump in, I also just wanted to acknowledge that I know Shannon and I were chatting briefly, while we were waiting to get started. And I know we're definitely feeling like it's a little surreal to be doing this in the midst of everything that's going on, everything that has been going on with the pandemic, and now on top of that, everything that happened yesterday. That and say that, like, we see you guys, we know that the work that you do every day is incredibly difficult before all of this happened, and that all of this stuff going on in the world makes it even that much more difficult to be here and be present and, integrate all of this information. So, take what you can today. If at any point you feel like this is all just too much and you want to hop off, please do that. We will not take it personally. Everything that we talk about today, we're recording and it'll be posted up on Zoom. So if this moment is not a good moment for you, please, we invite you to do this some other time. So with that said, I just want to do a couple of quick housekeeping things. I don't know, I'm not sure. We may have some folks, we've got a long list here. Can you see, Shannon, if we've got?
Alice? Alice is here.
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking?
Okay. Hey, Alice. Sorry, Alice. So we're joined by Alice today from Alice Minervino, who I think most of you know from the Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. And I'm not sure whether we may also have some folks from our partners at DOH on the line. And so Shannon and I are going to go through the slides today, but if at any point we miss anything and there's anything that you guys want to add, anything, of course, that you think we got wrong, just as always, invite our government partners to jump in at any time. So couple other quick housekeeping things. So the slides for today are already up on the CT Boss website, so you can get them from there. Shannon's also going to get them into the chat in just a moment if she hasn't already done that. And so you can also grab them out of the chat window in Zoom if you prefer. We're recording, I already said that. What else? Oh, muted, everyone is muted today. And we ask you, just because it creates a lot of background noise, to keep yourselves muted unless you're speaking. And we do invite folks at any time, if you've got questions, you can either put them in the chat and we'll read them from the chat and answer them, or if you want, unmute yourself and you can ask your question out loud. So don't be shy. And we're scheduled to be together this morning until 11:30. We've got a lot of content to cover. We will absolutely get through all of everything by 11:30, and folks that need to can hop off. If there are still folks that have questions at 11:30 and you want to stay on, I can stay on for a few minutes if there are lingering questions that we don't have time to get to through the presentation. So Alice, did you want anything you want to add, or Shannon, anything I missed?
Nope, sounds good.
Okay. All right. So let me switch our slides here. So this is our agenda for this morning. We're going to talk about, I think we've got a mixed crowd of people here, as we often do. So we've got folks who are old hats at this and who have been through monitoring before. And then we've got some folks who I think are new and, new or have been around but have not been monitored before. And so we're going to talk just generally about what monitoring is, why we monitor, what you can expect if Housing Innovations comes out to monitor. I keep saying comes out. In the new world, we will be monitoring you remotely in 2021, like what you can expect will happen, how that's going to look. And then we're really going to focus on the recent changes to the monitoring guide. There are very few changes, good news for everyone, I hope, to the monitoring guide in 2020. In 2021, but we're also going to talk about the biggest changes that we made in 2020, since those are still kind of new. We thought that would be helpful. And then we'll talk about what are some of the biggest findings that we see, right? We'll go through, some information that will help you avoid the most common findings that we see. And we'll go through the tool that I just talked about a minute ago, the new tool that we developed. We'll talk about HUD monitoring and how that works and what to expect if you get notified by HUD that they are going to monitor you. And then we will wrap up and see if you guys have any questions or suggestions for us. So our goal is always to be as helpful as we possibly can for you guys, to make sure that we are providing the guidance, the information, the tools that you need. So please, please, please tell us if there's anything that we could be doing differently, ideas that you have for how to make monitoring or any of the other compliance supports that we provide better. And you can do that today, or, of course, call our team at any time. I did want to say that today is not going to be, we've got 90 minutes together, and as we'll see in a minute, there really are a voluminous amount of regulations and rules associated with this program. So we are, I promise you, not going to try to jam all of that into 90 minutes. So what our goal today really is to help you guys to, is really more big picture than that, and then to point you guys in the direction of where all of the information is available on our website, if you want to dive deeper into any particular compliance related topic. All right, so let's get to it. So a little bit of background about monitoring, what it is and why we do it. So basically monitoring, just in case you're brand new and you don't even know what I'm talking about with monitoring, like monitoring really just means that Housing Innovations, does a review of a CoC project on behalf of either the Connecticut Balance of State Continuum of Care or DMIS. And what we look at is whether or not your project's policies and practices are consistent with the things that your funders require, right? The funders in this case being HUD and or DMIS or DOH, right? And so we do that on behalf of the Connecticut Balance of State Continuum of Care. And then we also do that for DMIS for their CoC rental assistance projects statewide. So that includes projects that are both in CT BOSS as well as in the Opening Doors Fairfield County Continuum of Care. And the reason we do that is because HUD requires us to do that, right? So HUD requires CoCs to monitor the projects that they fund, and HUD also requires recipients of CoC funds to monitor their subrecipients, right? So there's some CoC projects where your nonprofit agency is not getting the money directly from HUD, but rather DMIS, most commonly in CT BOSS, either DMIS or DOH is getting that money, and then they are giving you guys a sub-award, and they are required to monitor you, the subrecipient, and they have asked Housing Innovations to do that on their behalf. So, so this year we are slated to monitor 16 Continuum of Care projects, primarily, I think actually exclusively in CT BOSS this year. And we've been doing monitoring since I think it was 2013 when we started doing monitoring. So we've been doing this for a number of years. Hopefully we are getting better at it, but you guys will tell us how we can continue to get better at it. And so, when we come out and monitor, basically, these are the things that we are looking for, right? So, the Continuum of Care program obviously is a federal program. The federal government is well known for making things very complicated and for having tons and tons of requirements associated with funding that they provide, right? And so when we come out and monitor, we're looking at whether or not you're meeting all of these different requirements that are really defined through these documents that we've linked to here on the website. And so throughout today's presentation, every time you see text that is green and underlined, that's a live link. So if you click on that, it will take you to the actual document on the web. And so the first thing is the CoC program interim rule. This is really the primary document that defines all of the regulations for the Continuum of Care program. We then also look at, for certain projects, and we'll talk later about what those projects are, whether or not you are following the federal fiscal management requirements, and those are defined in this document called the Uniform Administrative Requirements, right? And then on top of that, HUD also issues periodically notices that add another layer of requirements to the program. In addition, every year, there is what's known as the CoC program Notice of Funding Availability, or NOFA, and all projects that are funded under those NOFAs are required to follow the rules as defined in the NOFA for the grant that was funded under the NOFA, so that gets very complicated. And then HUD also attempts to release a whole bunch of other guidance to clarify things in NOFAs, in notices, and in the regulations. And so, so they have facts, frequently asked questions that are up on their website, as well as a whole bunch of other guidance documents. And then finally, we've also got up here the HUD page for the Youth Homeless Demonstration Program, or YHDP program. For that program, it is considered part of the Continuum of Care program. So thankfully, there's not a whole separate regulatory structure for that program, because that would really be quite overwhelming. In part, thankfully, and in part not thankfully, because that program doesn't always necessarily fit well into the CoC regulatory structure. But if you were to go to each of these links and attempt to read all of these documents, it would literally be thousands and thousands and thousands of pages. So, and then in addition to all of this, right, there's also all the local requirements, right? So HUD also requires CoCs to establish certain policies for the projects that we fund locally. So we've also got each of the CoCs, the link for the BOSS policies is up here, but ODFC also has their policies. And then you've got the Coordinated Access Network policies, the Rapid Rehousing Model guidelines. And so it's really quite a lot, right? So our goal today and always, right, is to help you guys. You guys are busy. We don't want you spending your precious time trying to make heads or tails of this. And so that's really our job through the monitoring and through the other kinds of compliance supports that we provide. So one of the ways that we've done that pretty recently is we've worked with DMIS to compile what's called the DMIS CoC Rental Assistance Operations Guide. And so a link to that document is up there, and that's really a document that for the DMIS CoC rental assistance programs is like kind of an overview of like the most important, all of these rules, the state rules, the CoC rules, and the federal rules all compiled into one document. So hopefully that's helpful for the folks that are running those kinds of programs. And then we are also in the process of developing a very similar operations guide for the DOH rapid rehousing programs, and that that is slated to be done later this year. So when that's available, we will let you know. And this is also the link here for the YHDP program, for the CT BOSS requirements for the YHDP programs. So that's a lot, right? And you know, as I said, we know that you guys are super busy, and that your priorities always, but now more than ever during the pandemic, really need to be helping your folks to get housed and stay housed and to keep everyone, your staff and your clients, safe. And that you know, it's a constant juggling act for you guys to try to do that given the resources that you have, and that we definitely understand that compliance and monitoring is not at the top of your priority list, and we don't think it should be at the top of your priority list either. So just to put that out there. And so part of what we do when we come out and monitor is, like, we really think of monitoring as like a risk management. You know, we take like a risk management approach to monitoring. So it's very, very difficult to be 100% compliant all the time, right? So we have never done a single monitoring visit where there were 0 findings, right? It would be virtually impossible for you to have 0 findings on a monitoring, because it's so much information and so complicated, and you've got other bigger things that you have to worry about, right? So our goal really is to help you guys to understand what the requirements are, and to help you get as close as you can, right, to full compliance, and most importantly, to help you identify what are the biggest problems, right? So where are your biggest risks, so that you can make decisions about how to prioritize the resources in your program to fix the things, you know, ultimately, hopefully all the things, but to focus first at least on the things that are the places where there could be some recapture risk, where HUD would actually come in and take back money. And we'll talk more about that. In a minute. And I just want to say that we, you know, when we come out and monitor, we are really consistently so impressed with you guys and with your teams, right? So despite the fact that you've got all of this going on, you know, and we always see staff who are, you know, super committed to their clients, right? And to really finding creative ways to help people, even when those folks are telling you to bug off, leave me alone, right? To finding ways to engage those folks and help them to, you know, to define the things that they want out of their lives, and to achieve those things. And so we want to say thank you for that. We also find that folks are often very overwhelmed by all of these rules, and of course you're overwhelmed by all of these rules. We're overwhelmed by all of these rules, but that consistently, despite being overwhelmed by all of these rules, you know, folks want to understand and want to comply. That's not the issue, right? The issue really usually always is resources. And so just wanted to say that we see that, we acknowledge that, and we understand that. So this is what we're trying to do when we come out and monitor. This is the goal of the monitoring program, is to really help you guys to understand and follow the requirements, to help you get ready in case HUD is going to come out and monitor your project, which if they haven't already, they will eventually do, and we'll talk more in detail about that later. And ultimately, we want the money that you guys get to be able to stay in your project so that you continue to use that money to help homeless people, right? And so our goal is to make sure that you never have to give any money back to HUD because of a compliance problem. And then of course, it helps us when we're monitoring, because it gives us an idea about, you know, where are you guys, you know, where do you really understand all of this and don't need our help? And where are there places where you're still struggling to understand or to meet the requirements, and how, you know, helps us discover new ways that we can continue to be helpful to you. So when we come out and monitor, right, we are not going to take money. Right, that's not like, so if we come out and monitor and we find that that you served an ineligible applicant, or you didn't document that they were eligible, or you expended funds on an ineligible activity, we're going to tell you that we think that that happened, and we're going to give you suggestions for how you can correct that, but we're not going to take that money back, right? And that's not the case when HUD comes and monitors. When HUD comes and monitors, they could actually take the money back, right? And when HUD comes and monitors, there's this kind of like, you can think of it as like a tier of like risk, right? So at the top of that tier would be if you did something really illegal and fraudulent, which we know you guys are not doing, right? But like if somebody stole the money, right, and went on a bender in Las Vegas, right, that would be at the top tier of like risk, right? Because if that happens and HUD finds out about it, that person's gonna go to jail, right? Like, but we don't, like, generally the kinds of things that we see when we monitor are not that, right? So no one has to worry about HUD jail. The main concern is that they're going to take some of the money back. Most commonly, what happens though is not that they take the money back. Most commonly what happens, you guys have a very nice, friendly, cooperative field office in Connecticut. They're really trying hard to support you and work with you, and they're really trying generally not to take money back, right? So most commonly what's going to happen is you're going to get a finding on the monitoring report, and you're going to have to correct the finding, right? But there's certain kinds of findings that the field office, that they would have to take the money back. So, and so that's what we're trying to help you guys avoid. And when we come out and we do monitoring, we really do a very thorough review, right? Because our goal is to try to help you guys to identify all the places that you're not, your policies, your practices are not aligned to what the requirements are. Again, so that you can, make decisions about what to prioritize and how to correct that. When HUD comes out, they often aren't doing as they're only looking at certain elements of your operations. We'll talk about that in a minute. They're not doing like a comprehensive review, and there often aren't as many findings, which is good, right? Because it's not because then there's less risk that you have to give the money back. But we really are trying to help you identify all the potential risks to really bring your risk with HUD down to as close to zero as we can. So that said, I just wanted to say briefly that, and I don't want people to get too worried about this because this is absolutely not the goal of monitoring. Our goal is to help you to understand and follow the requirements, but that at the same time, right, the CoC is responsible for being good stewards of these funds, and the recipients are responsible for, being good stewards of what their subrecipients are doing, right? So that's DMIS and DOH. And so there are circumstances in which if there were uncorrected monitoring findings, or monitoring findings that were determined could not be corrected for structural reasons, right? There's a conflict between two funding sources is the most common one. Then the steering committee really is obligated to reallocate those funds. So I'm saying that just to, to be transparent about that. But it is certainly not the goal, and it's to date hasn't happened yet. All right. So a little bit about who we monitor and how we select which projects are going to get monitored every year. So basically, every year we talk about what the criteria we're going to use to decide which projects are going to get monitored with the steering committee. And then the Connecticut Balance of State co-chairs decide which projects CT BOSS is going to monitor, and then DMIS decides which projects we are going to monitor on behalf of them. And these are the primary factors that we consider when we decide which grants we're going to monitor. So the first one is that we prioritize bigger grants, because obviously the more money that's in a grant, the more risk there is that HUD's going to take that money back. So we prioritize bigger grants. We also, in the last couple of years, have been prioritizing agencies that have not ever been monitored before for a CoC project. And so if you are an agency that has never been monitored before, we will get to you soon, because we're closing in on having monitored everyone. Probably not this year, but in the next couple of years, you can expect that you will get monitored if you haven't been yet. And then we also have been prioritizing, if your agency is new to getting CoC funds, right? You haven't, which is mostly primarily either new projects or our YHDP portfolio, right? Some of those agencies are brand new to the CoC. Because this is so complicated and there are so many rules, we want to try to make sure we're supporting the agencies that are brand new to this. And then if you've been monitored and there were a lot of significant findings, we will come back the next year to check and see how you're doing at correcting some of those findings. These are some other factors that we consider. I'm not going to go through all of this. You have it here. These have not changed. I will just say that if you've been around a while, at one point, the first several years of monitoring, we were really focusing on only projects that had done poorly on renewal evaluation. We shifted a couple years ago because of two things. We wanted to make sure, as I just said, that we got to monitor everyone. And then secondly, it became clear that like evaluation and monitoring are two different things, right? So you could do very well on your renewal evaluation, which is really about like kind of your outcomes for your clients, but not really fully understand all the compliance stuff or be aligned with all the compliance stuff. So we are no longer using that as one of our primary factors, although we do still consider renewal evaluation scores to some extent when we decide who's going to be monitored. And then another thing that we have committed to you guys that we're absolutely still doing is that we're not going to come out and monitor your projects multiple times in the same year, right? And we coordinate with CSH so that we try hard not to come out in the same year that CSH is coming out to monitor on behalf of DMIS through the Quality Improvement Initiative. So there are some exceptions to that. There are times when we need to come out more than once, or we need to come out in the same year that CSH is coming out, but generally speaking, we try hard not to do that. Okay. So, what can you expect when you're being monitored? So the first thing is that we really try to make it, it's an open book test, right? We really try to make it so that there are no surprises, right? So at the top of this slide, you can see a link to the monitoring guide, and that document literally has all of the criteria that we look at when we come out and monitor. Now, we don't necessarily monitor on all of those criteria every time because it's a lot, but it's the total universe of the possible things that we could look at, right? And it really is, it compiles all of those documents that we looked on the earlier slides, the federal requirements, the state requirements, the CoC requirements, into one document, right? So if you're looking for one place where all of the requirements are, that's a good place to look. And that document is available always, right? It's always up. The most current version is always up on our CT Boss website. So you don't have to wait until you get a notice that you're being monitored to get familiar with that document, right? Actually, we always suggest, right, that it's good to be ready for monitoring all the time. If you wait until you get a monitoring notice to scramble to say, oh God, what are all the things that we should be doing, and how, that's going to stress your team out, right? So we really very much encourage you guys, and we'll talk about this more later, to use the monitoring guide and the other tools that we were providing to do regular, internal chart audits so that you are always monitoring ready, that it's not a mad scramble when you get the notice. So the guide really has, like I said, all the criteria that we use during monitoring. It also cites all of the regulations, notices, policies, et cetera, upon which those criteria are based. And then it provides links to a ton of resources, so that you know what the expectations are before we get there. All right, so this has not changed. So for anyone that's been through monitoring before, our basic process is remaining virtually the same. Shannon's going to go through in a couple of minutes what some of the minor changes are. But the first thing that will happen is you'll get an email from either CT Boss or from Shannon and I saying that your project has been selected for monitoring. You'll get that email at least 4 weeks before the proposed monitoring date, and usually more like 6 or 8 weeks before the date. And it'll include a list of things that we are asking you to submit before that date and a deadline for doing that. Shannon and I will look at all that stuff you sent to us. You'll tell us if we missed anything before we come. And then we always start each monitoring with an entrance conference, right? So we'll meet with you at the beginning of the day to go over any questions we have about the stuff that you sent, to talk about how the day is gonna go. You can ask us questions. And then really, monitoring really is a lot of Shannon, and there's a third member of our team, Howard Birchman, Shannon, Howard, and I, digging into your participant charts, right? So the bulk of the day, we really work independently. So if we're coming out and monitoring you, you do not need to plan to sit with us all day, right? We're gonna work independently throughout the day, and you can go about your business. And if we have a question for you, we'll let you know. And then if you are a nonprofit that is getting either money directly from HUD or CoC money through a subaward with either DOH or DEMIS, we will also do a fiscal review. And that's Howard on our team does that. And he would basically meet with somebody from your fiscal office and, and go through some of your fiscal records to make sure that all of those T's are crossed and I's are dotted. Back before the global pandemic, when we were doing at least some of this on site, we would also do a brief program tour. We do plan to eventually get back to doing some on-site monitoring once we are all vaccinated. But obviously we're not gonna do that when we're monitoring remotely. And then also, whether it's on-site or remote monitoring, we interview a staff person, we ask a staff person some questions, we interview just one client, and we ask that client some questions. And if we're on-site, we also will go and look at an actual client, a unit. If someone's willing, we'll look at an actual client unit. And then at the end of all that, at the end of the day, we do what we call an exit conference, right? So we meet with you again and we tell you everything that we found, right? Everything that is going to be a finding on your report, so that there are no surprises when you get the report, so that you can get started right away if you want, before you even get the report, on making any necessary adjustments. And also, and really important to us, is so that you guys can tell us if we got something wrong, right? There's a ton of stuff that we're looking at when we monitor, and we absolutely miss things and we absolutely make mistakes. So if you think that we've made a mistake, you guys tell us that, and we'll fix it right there before we even conclude the day of the monitoring visit. Then once we've done that, then we issue a draft report, and that report, we try really hard to get that done within 4 weeks of the visit, and we're pretty consistent at that, so that you don't have to wait forever to get the report. We send you a draft report, and again, if you think we've gotten something wrong, we can talk about that and make those changes. And then we issue a final report. And when we issue the final report, that's the point at which you would need to do a follow-up plan. And generally, we give you about a month from when you get the follow-up plan, from when you get the final report to do the follow-up plan. So when you get the report, and this goes back to the risk management strategy that I talked about earlier, there are 3 different kinds of findings that would be on the report, right? The first one are the things that we think are the recapture risks. So those are like the high priority things. And if there are those things, and there almost always are. So if you get a monitoring report and you have these things, don't feel badly about it, right? That's the whole point of monitoring. Then for those things that are recapture risks, those are the things that you're required to do a follow-up plan on. And then for things that are findings but not recapture risks, they're going to be highlighted in yellow, and you should correct those things. But you don't have to do a follow-up plan unless you've been monitored multiple times and you've consistently, like, not corrected over several years those things. Then sometimes the CoC or the recipient, DMIS or DOH, will require that you submit a follow-up plan on all the findings. And then finally, there are some things in the guide that are not requirements, but they're best practices. And for those things, you guys have the option of whether or not you want to implement the recommendation that we're making or not, and those things are highlighted in green on the report. Okay, so I said a lot, and I am going to turn it over to Shannon now, and she's going to walk us through what some of the changes are.
Great. I just want to.
We don't have any questions in the chat.
I was just going to address one. Margaret asked, can staff be with the client if the client wants during the client interview? And I said in the chat, like, of course, we never want the clients to be uncomfortable, but the goal is to ask them questions about your program and the satisfaction with your program. So if the client did have anything critical to say, it might be awkward if the staff were right there. But if that's really a strong preference of the client, of course, it's okay with us.
Yeah, and the other thing also is that the client interview is never mandatory, right? So if you don't have a client who's willing to do it, we won't do it, right? It's always voluntary for the clients to do it.
True. We never want to put the client in a position where they're not comfortable. Yeah.
Thanks, Shannon.
Sure. Okay, so changes. Hopefully you all know that song because that's where the graphics from. But good news is there are not many changes since last year. So we're going to go through the few changes for this year, and some of them you will see make very good sense given the environment we're in right now. And we'll go through some of the changes that were updated for 2020 since most of you weren't monitored then. Next slide. So all of the monitoring this year will be remote. We, as Lauren said, are getting our notices out there. Some of you may have received them already. And when we do remote monitorings, we focus on the most significant requirements, previous findings and new requirements. We tested remote monitoring for the first time in 2019, which is the first full year of normal monitoring that we did. And it was very well received. Providers found it more efficient, less burdensome. We weren't hanging out in people's offices all day and they're wondering if we're comfortable, if we're okay, if we need anything. I think that was a relief for some providers. So we expanded that in 2020, and now we're doing all remote, again, given the COVID times that we're in for this year. So we access records remotely, which is different. All that client chart looking at that Lauren is referencing, we're going to be doing that remotely. So the options are outlined here on how we would do that. So options are upload unredacted documents into your client's HMIS record, which was really the easy, from our perspective, and I believe from the provider's perspective as well, the easiest way we found to do it, because then, like, the whole redaction thing, there's not the confidentiality concerns that would come with trying to redact every single bit of personal private information that you might have to redact. So we really encourage you to choose that if that's an option for you. Or so in that instance, you would give us time-limited remote access to your HMIS, or you may have a different electronic health record system in your agency, and you could give us time-limited remote access to that as well. Or the last option is redact the selected documents and submit them via Dropbox or by email. this is discouraged, but it might be necessary for some, based on your system or based on your confidentiality requirements. We send you a list of documents we want to see for specific clients a few days ahead of our visit, so you'll know what documents you have to upload and get to us. We try to make that list brief to make remote monitoring less burdensome. Again, the first year that we did this remote monitoring, every agency that we worked with chose the HMIS option, and it worked really well. So again, our goal is to make it as painless as possible for you. If there's anything that you're aware of that we can do to make this easier, please let us know. Next slide. New in 2021, as you all know, because I do believe all of you are signed up, have an account in Zengen, is Zengen. So it's our BOSS grants management database. CT BOSS providers must enroll in Zengen to be able to submit their necessary documents. So all of the monitoring documents, the pre-review documents that we ask to look at must be submitted through Zengen. There's a link here on this page that will give you all of the information you need to create an account if you haven't done that already, and there's instructions on how to upload documents. So there's no more uploading to Dropbox all the pre-review information. And so far, I've been working with one provider who we're monitoring in January, who's uploaded the documents to Zengen, and it's gone fairly smoothly.
Shannon, I just want to say one quick thing, because I do think we have some ODFC folks on. So this is not applicable for ODFC. It's only applicable for CT BOSS. So if you are joining us today from Fairfield County, you guys will continue to use Dropbox.
Thank you. So also new in 2021, as many of you know, because we did this webinar back in December, CT BOSS, this is again for CT BOSS, Dedicated Plus is the new eligibility requirement for PSH as opposed to chronic homeless. So there's a link to the slides here for the presentation that we did on that and the recording. There are new forms for the Dedicated Plus eligibility that are linked here as well. There are sample letters for documenting Dedicated Plus status and the sample project intake policy, all those revised policies. So what this will look like when we are monitoring, again, for client records, this may or may not come into play depending on who we choose. If we haven't chosen somebody who has been entered in the 2021, we will look at the old eligibility requirements. But starting January 1st of this year, all PSH projects are now Dedicated Plus. So we will be looking for updated policy, like intake policies and that type of thing when we do the pre-review. Next slide.
Sorry, just a couple quick things on this slide, Shannon. The updated homelessness verification form. So that's the form that's used for all projects, right? So everyone, regardless of whether or not you're a PSH project, should make sure that you have gone to the CT BOSS website and downloaded that new form and are using that new form, okay? And please get rid of, I know it's hard once a form gets out there in the universe, it seems to live on forever and ever, but do your best to try to get rid of old versions of that form, because this is the current version that you should be using. And then we also just wanted to get back to people quickly when we had do you want to do it, Shannon, or?
Yeah, there was a question that was asked during the webinar for the, so we had to go to HUD for it. They said that people transferring from rapid rehousing to permanent supportive housing, you need not have a disability documentation from entry to rapid rehousing. You can get the disability documentation at the time of permanent supportive housing entry. So that was a lingering question that we found the answer to. Is that good, Lauren? Thanks. So also new in 2021, obviously HUD COVID-19 waivers. If any of your projects have chosen to implement the waivers available, there's a procedure you need to go through to do that. So you need to notify HUD in writing no less than 2 days before using the waiver. There's the address that you send it to here. And we also ask that you submit a copy to CT Boss through Zengen. Again, the instructions to do so are here. And then there's the memo discussing the waiver and all of the options that are available to you, exceptions that can be made because of COVID. That link is here. And the waiver notification template, which is a really handy tool to use if you are choosing to use one of the waivers. That's linked here as well. If you are using the waiver, we'll ask to see what you submitted and ask for verification that you did submit it and to HUD when we come to monitor. Next slide.
Shannon, real quick in the chat box, we've got from Katie that the YHD projects can continue to use the YHDP specific homeless verification form. So I apologize for that. That's my bad. I should have said that. That's absolutely right, Katie. When I said that everyone needs to download that new form and use that new form, I should have said everyone except for our YHDP projects need to do that. So thanks, Katie, for clarifying that.
Are you going to the next slide? Yeah. Also new in 2021, this is not a new requirement, but it was not previously monitored, is rent reasonableness policies and procedures. DEMIS project, this policy is already covered in the DEMIS operations guide. So if any of your agencies need your own policy, don't have this in place already, please look at the guide, which is on the CT Boss website, and you could just lift the policies from there and insert them into your own. Housing Innovations is also developing a similar guide for Department of Health rapid rehousing projects. So recipients must have written policies and procedures for documenting all comparable rents, determining rent reasonableness, and documenting rent reasonableness in your case files. Again, it's a great idea to lift this from the DEMIS operations guide policies if you don't have your own policies already. Reminder, rent reasonableness. This is an area where we have findings every so often. So rents must be reasonable based on comparable units in the community, may not exceed rents currently be charged by the same owner for comparable unassisted space. So units assisted with rental assistance fund can exceed FMR within available project budget if they're found to be reasonable given other comparable units. Units assisted with leasing funds cannot exceed FMR. Those are HUD rules. So your projects must determine whether the rent charged is reasonable, taking into account location, size, type, quality, amenities of each unit. And we ask that you document, when we come out, we're looking for documentation of 3 comparable units. Rents for assisted units must not be higher than comparables. And when we list those, so something I've seen a few times in monitoring that we'll be looking at like a one bed, or like the bedroom sizes won't be the same as the unit that we're looking at, or the square footage will be vastly different on the comparable units than the unit that we're looking at, but we really want them to be as close as possible, not exact. Bedroom size would be the same, and the square footage would be comparable, that type of thing, when we're looking at that rent reasonableness checklist. And there's a form here that is a great tool to use to meet this criteria. Next slide. So these are new-ish items. They're changes from 2020, and we thought, again, since most of you were not monitored in 2020, we thought it would be helpful to review some of these as well. Federal disability related requirements. So we are now looking again, these requirements are not new, but we had not assessed these prior to 2020. So review of reasonable accommodation records, we asked prior to us coming out if you have received any requests for reasonable accommodations. We look at your actions taken in those instances, and we're looking at whether your program is accessible for an effective communication with people with disabilities. We're looking at accessible technology. So for instance, examples of things that we might look for are ensuring that all meetings are held, services provided, in facilities that are physically accessible to persons with disabilities, and that your projects might take appropriate steps to ensure effective communication with people. Is sign language available? Is large print available? Are there note takers in meetings for people if that's helpful for people? In terms of accessible technology, ideally your website and all electronic documents are Section 508 and 504 compliant, but it's probably more realistic to find a way for somebody who is having trouble accessing what they need to ask you for an accessible format, and then you would be able to provide that format. And the next slide is going to talk. We're working on this ourselves as a CoC to become more accessible. So as we develop and discover resources, we're going to share them with you, one of which is this webinar that we're going to hold in February. It's going to be February 18th from 10 to 11 a.m. This is really going to be a high-level overview of electronic documents. So how you put together a document so that people using accessibility technology would be able to easily read these documents that you might publish or that you might send to your clients, so that they'll be as easily accessible as possible and understandable as possible. I sent out a notice this morning that I think had the wrong date. It said February 19th instead of February 18th, so I'm going to send a revised invitation out, but this is the correct date, February 18th from 10 to 11 a.m. Next slide. Federal limited English proficiency requirements. Again, same as the last couple of slides. The requirements are not new, but the assessing of the requirements are new on our part. So what we're looking at here is, has your agency conducted an assessment of need for the particular project we're coming out to look at, or for the agency in general, for persons with limited English proficiency? So what is the frequency with which your agency encounters people with limited English proficiency? And then what types of needs do those people have? What languages do they speak? Again, with the sign language or Spanish speaking or other types of languages that people speak. And then we're wanting to look and see what actions you've taken given that assessment. So how have you acted on that assessment? Do you have translation services available? Do you have bilingual staff? Do you have TTY services available for people who are hearing impaired? So we're just looking at the assessment and then what actions have taken it and that they make sense given the population that you're serving. There's also a sample language access policy linked here, and then some HUD guidance against discrimination affecting people with limited English proficiency. Some of these words are hard to say, Lauren. Next slide. Avoiding common monitoring findings. Next slide. Internal chart review. So as Lauren kind of indicated before, ideally some of these measures are in place on a regular basis, whether it's monthly, quarterly, whatever time frame makes sense for your project and your agency annually, so that when monitoring comes, it's not this mad rush and panic to get things in order, or surprises in your files, that type of thing. So it's a great idea to ensure supervisory review of all eligibility documentation, because as Lauren indicated, like this is a place of higher risk, right? This is a place where if HUD came out and found that you didn't follow the right eligibility criteria, it could be a risk to recapture funds. Conduct an internal chart audit at least annually. This could be a random chart. This can be at whatever type of chart review that makes sense for you, but look at least a selection of charts randomly and go through and make sure all the required documents are in there. Then another idea is to use the electronic health record, or HMIS, to identify missing and overdue documents, assessments, gaps. This can really be a great tool to easily look at all of the information you have for clients. I wanted to note that it's the admitting project's responsibility to ensure eligibility documents received from the CAN meet HUD requirements. So even though the CAN is super helpful in getting things together, for us, it's really our project's responsibility to make sure those documents are correct and meet all the requirements. And you must document eligibility at project entry. Oftentimes we'll see that projects receive documents from the CAN from a month or 2 months ago, but we really need to know that a person was homeless when they're entering this, when they're enrolling into this program. So make sure that eligibility, the homeless verification, is updated if there would be any gap. Next slide. There's a new tool. Someone unmuted themselves. I didn't know if there's a question or no. Okay. All right. New tool, participant chart documentation. Requirements by project type. So I linked this in the chat a couple of times. This is a new document that Lauren put together that is really, really useful. Like we're saying, the risk mitigation is the major goal of monitoring, but also what we find out what challenges. Of course, we know with the unfathomable amount of information and papers to go through to see all the guidance, to know all the rules and regulations. We know that some of this information is overwhelming. So this is another thing that helps us with monitoring, or we find out from monitoring, or ideas for tools that might be helpful to put everything as much as possible in one place to make things easy for you to understand and be able to follow. So I think this is a great tool that does some of that. So when you look at the form, it indicates which documents should be in the CoC program participants' charts for permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, which includes the DV bonus, YHDP rapid rehousing, and YHDP diversion rapid exit projects. Transitional housing includes YHDP crisis housing and YHDP Youth Navigator projects. There are links to required forms, sample forms, and other guidance in the document. And we wanted to remind you that it's important to retain all documents. It's a HUD requirement to retain all documents for a minimum of 5 years. Maintain participant eligibility documentation for 5 years after the end date of the last grant operating year during which a participant was served. So again, the goal is to use this tool throughout the year so you can always be ready for monitoring. Scrambling, as we said, is no fun. So this is a snippet of the document that we just referenced. So you can see documentation of homelessness, what's required it's required for all types of programs. Documentation of disability only required for permanent supportive housing programs. and documentation of age, which is more specific to the YHDP projects. Next slide. Non-YHDP CT BOSS homeless requirements. So PSH, starting, as I said, on January 1st of this year, their eligibility is dedicated plus, whereas previously it had been, well, actually, yeah, previously it had been the chronic homeless requirements. DV bonus rapid rehousing is category 4 homeless. Let's see. Category 4 is fleeing or attempting to flee domestic violence, human trafficking, and does not have any other option. All other rapid rehousing, categories 1, excluding people living in transitional housing, and 4, category 1 is literally homeless, living in the shelters, streets, place not meant for human habitation, or excluding people living in transitional. So transitional housing, categories 1 and 4. Again, currently all PSH projects are 100% dedicated plus. All PSH projects converted to dedicated plus in the 2019 project applications. So CANS will start referring dedicated plus this month, January. And we're going through this slide because inadequate eligibility documentations continues to be the most common significant finding and the biggest recapture risk. CT BOSS YHDP,
Shannon,
yeah.
We're running low on time, so I'm wondering for this, like some of these, just note what information is here and let's move through it, especially since we don't have a ton of YHDP providers. Like this
Okay.
table is available.
Yep.
You don't have to go through it all.
Okay, I just wanted to say category 2 that's listed here means at imminent risk in the next 14 days of homelessness and doesn't have another option. Go ahead, next slide. Eligibility verification updated in November of this year. Yeah, so just all these forms are linked here. There's more information, CT BOSS homeless verification form, sample letters documenting dedicated plus, like we talked about already, and the sample project intake policy that is updated with the dedicated plus information, like we talked about already. Disabling condition form that was updated as well. Go ahead, next slide. Service frequency and assertive engagement. What we're really looking at when we come out and look at files here is that you are working with each participant, each project participant as an individual, and you know what's going on with them. We know that through the assessments that are done and through the client notes, and then whatever actions are being taken are commensurate with what's going on, makes sense for this client, this individual, based on what you found is going on with them. So in general contact, so timely intervention on issues that threaten housing stability, health, well-being. We would expect that if there's something going on with a person that's threatening their housing stability, there would be more frequent attempts to intervene with them. And then also a variety of attempts. Like if the phone is not working, we're looking that you're trying to go out to their housing and see how they're doing, or you're trying texting, or that you are trying to contact some other emergency contacts that you might have for that individual in order to work with them and provide services that make sense given the situation that's going on with the individual. In general, we look for contact attempts that occur at least twice a month. Less frequent contact attempts are supported by an assessment indicating a lower level of need. So if it does make sense to do less frequently, that's okay, but we want to see a rationale for it. And as I'm saying this, a lot of this has to do with documentation. So you might be kind of following these rules, but not writing it down. And so then we don't know. We don't know that what you're saying makes sense for this individual because we don't have this backup information that's showing us that. So We're looking at rapid rehousing case managers, check in with participants at least monthly. We look for regular attempts using a variety of contact methods, as I indicated, phone, text, in person, invitations to recreational opportunities, different ways that you might engage, offering things that this person is going to be appreciative of, or food, toiletries, things, excuse me, that are needed by an individual that might encourage them to engage some more, or to build a trusting relationship with you. Home visits, PSH and transitional housing are required by DEMIS. So frequency, again, commensurate with the need, and at least once within the first 30 days of tenancy, and then every 6 months thereafter, required by DEMIS. Next slide. Termination of assistance must be consistent with housing first. So again, we're providing housing without any preconditions. We're not requiring sobriety. We're not requiring compliance with any mental or behavioral health treatment, all of those types of things. There's a housing first training linked here that can give you more information on them. But there are some cases where termination is necessary. And in those cases, what we look for are written notice of termination. This does not apply to YHDP Youth Navigator. So reasons for terminating are going to be on this notice of termination. Provide a written copy of the rules. Notify the participant of the opportunity to appeal the decision, the right that they have a right to receive written notification of the final decision, and send the notification to the last known address, even if the current address is not known. We need to provide notice to everyone who exits the project, regardless of the reason, unless the only reason we don't do this is if a person is deceased. So even if it's an amicable leaving, they're moving on, they're going to a place that they want to move on to, we send them a letter terminating assistance, so that way there's no misunderstanding. If we misunderstood on our part, they get this notice, they say, wait a minute, that's not what I agreed to. It's just it's a way to make sure everyone is on the same page. Next slide. When is provision of VAWA forms required? This is another thing that we come across sometimes in monitoring. The notice of occupancy rights and certification forms, 2 different documents, must be provided at each of the following times. When an individual or family is denied housing, when a program participant is admitted to housing, we must provide those 2 forms. When a program participant receives notification of eviction, they must receive those 2 forms, or when a participant is notified of termination of assistance. And just a special note, in tenant-based rental assistance, private landlords in housing that's assisted, they're required to give notice or give these forms with the eviction notice. So if the landlord is the one giving these, giving the eviction notice, they need to provide these forms as well. Next slide. I think I'm handing it over to Lauren.
I'm going to pick it up from here. There are a couple of questions that came in the chat box, but we're running behind and I want to get through all of the content. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite people, if you put a question in the chat box and we don't get to it, please stay on if you can. I'll stay on to answer your questions, or if you can't, just call me or email me and I will answer your questions. So one of the things that we commonly find in monitoring that is that, one of the bigger, in addition to eligibility, recapture risks is ineligible expenditures. So you've spent CoC funds on things that are not allowed by HUD. So we just wanted to go through quickly what the rules are around eligible expenses. So basically, the CoC program rule outlines all the things that are eligible to be, that you can use their money for. right? And if it doesn't say it in the CoC rule that you can use the money for that thing, then you can't use it for that thing, right? And I'm not going to go through because it's a lot, because there's so many different budget line items and each budget line item has their own list. But I'm going to show you in a minute a link to the place where you can find all of that information. So that's the first thing you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about, okay, how can I spend this money? The second thing that you have to keep in mind is whether or not you've got that particular budget line item in your actual program budget, right? So every year, your CoC project does a project budget as part of the annual competition. So you submit a project application in eSnaps, then you go through the whole technical submission process, and there might be some changes that HUD requires to that budget. And then ultimately, HUD approves that budget and it's part of your grant agreement, right? So you have to think about both what's eligible under the CoC program rule and what do I have approved in my budget, right? So when you're expending CoC funds, you can only expend those things on both eligible and approved expenses, right? And when you're expending matching funds, you can expend it on any eligible expense regardless of whether or not it's approved in your budget. And if you want to make changes to your approved budget, then there's certain requirements and steps that you have to take around that. I'm not going to go through all of those now. They're in the fiscal training that Howard and I did that we're going to show you the link to in a minute. So here's just, generally what we suggest to make sure that that you're only expending funds on eligible expenses. The first thing is to know what are the budget line items that your project has in your budget, right? So the most common ones we have in CT BOSS are rental assistance, leasing, operating, and project admin. So you want to know which of those you have so that then you can know which activities are eligible under that budget line item. And here's the link to that training where all of this is covered in a lot of detail. The most common thing that we see in terms of cost eligibility when we come out is a lot of confusion around the project administration budget line item versus indirect costs. And I just want to say that the reason that there's so much confusion around this is because HUD has made it incredibly confusing, right? It is very, very complicated and it works very differently than other kinds of funding that you guys normally get. And so in the HUD CoC world, like project administration expenses are limited only to the things that are specifically cited in the CoC rule, right? So for example, you can spend the project administration budget line item on environmental review or on like activities related to project evaluation or the time that your staff spend doing your APR. But it's not meant to be like kind of a general agency overhead pot of money, right? And there's a very different way that you have to bill for it, which I'm going to go through in a minute, as opposed to indirect costs. And the entire list of there's a whole training just on this topic on the CT BOSS website that goes through all of what are the eligible project admin expenses versus what's indirect. So I'm just going to cover this quickly now, right? So indirect in the HUD world is really more the things that I think your agency probably typically thinks of as your admin expenses, right? So those are your general agency overhead expenses, things like, the cost of your, staff that are doing your payroll, your HR department, your IT department. That is an indirect expense. And the thing that we see trips people up most often is that, first of all, very few of your agencies are actually claiming indirect on your HUD budgets, right? Most of your agencies, there's a place in the project application where if you want to bill indirect, you've got to say on the project application that you want to bill indirect, right? And if you're going to bill indirect, there are two different possibilities. One is that your agency has what's called a NICRA, a negotiated indirect rate, basically. And if your agency has a NICRA, then you have to say on the project application that we have a NCRA, and then you're able to bill indirect expenses at that NCRA rate. If your agency doesn't have a NCRA, then you have the option of billing indirect at the at what's called the 10% de minimis rate. But you can only do that if you've said it on your project application, and most of you are not saying it on your project application. So we'll talk in a minute about what you might wanna do about that. So, and I just want to say that, like, so project admin is an actual line on your budget. So it'll say, you know, whatever, you've got $50,000 in project admin, right? You'd be a very big grant if you have $50,000 in project admin. But if you decide you want to start billing indirect, it's not a budget line item, and it's not going to increase your budget, right? So it's not like suddenly you're going to get 10% more money. You're just going to be able to use the money that you get in a slightly different way. So you'll be able, and this is probably most relevant if you've got some underspending, right? So if you're not fully spending your money, so you've got money available and you're not billing indirect, you want to think about whether or not it makes sense for your agency to claim either your NCRA or claim the de minimis rate. And if you've got questions about this, I know it's complicated, call me. I will likely direct you to Howard because he's our fiscal guru. So, so this is the thing that really, I think, trips people up, is that admin, right? You've got to have backup documentation for that, right? So it's not like you can just say, okay, we've got a $1 million grant, and you know, we've got 7% of that in our project admin line item, so that's 70,000. And so we build that 70,000 because it's 7%, and there's no backup documentation, right? That's not how project admin works. For project admin, you actually have to have backup documentation for those expenses. And we'll look in a minute at a way of doing that backup documentation for the expenses that are personnel expenses, so for your staff time. As opposed to indirect, right? Indirect is a lot easier, right? Because you don't have to have that backup documentation. And there are a lot of expenses that are actually eligible under either category. So for some of you, indirect may be a better way to go than project admin because it's less onerous to do the backup documentation, and there's lower recapture risk, all right? So this is the link to the training that Howard did really just on this topic. So, so I think the first thing is to know whether or not what you have is admin and or indirect by looking at your project application. We can help you figure out where you have to look for that if you need it. And then deciding whether or not, if you're not already claiming indirect, you want to be claiming indirect. And we're always happy to consult on that to help if needed. So I said this before, so we commonly see that folks are not just on admin, but across CoC budgets, not documenting time correctly in accordance with the HUD rules. So if you've got staff that are only working on one project and one budget line item, then all you need is to have them do their timesheet and have that timesheet signed off on by a supervisor. That suffices. But most of you do not have enough money in your CoC project budgets to make that a reality. So most of you are having staff working across projects or at least across budget line items. And what I mean by that is you've got a case manager that's providing supportive services and also maybe doing housing quality inspections or doing rent calculations or doing things that are considered under the CoC program to be not social service expenses, but rather rental assistance expenses. So if you've got that situation where you've got a staff person that's either working on more than one CoC budget line item or working on multiple projects, CoC projects or non-CoC projects, then you've got to do additional documentation for HUD showing backup for the time that they spent on the CoC project. And we've created a sample, it's called the personnel activity log, that would suffice. There are other ways to do this, right? Some agencies do it through electronic case notes or other sorts of logging systems. So the personnel activity log is not required, it's just a tool that we've you've got to do something, right? You can't just rely on timesheets if this is how your projects are configured, but you're not necessarily required to do the personnel activity log. It's just one option for how you could do it. Okay, so I'm not going to go into match because we really don't have time. I'll just say quickly that you do, if you are using in-kind match, we really would like to help you stop doing that because the documentation requirements are very difficult for that. So in most programs in Connecticut, there's a lot of money available in Connecticut. I mean, I know not enough, but there's, compared to other places that we work, there's a lot of money available in Connecticut. And a lot of you probably could be using, most of you could probably be using cash match. So if you're still using in-kind, let's talk about it and see if we can get you off of in-kind. And then everything that we develop for the, like all the information that we develop, all the trainings, all the guidance, all the tools, every time there's a change, right? All that stuff goes out to the CT Boss email list. So you really want to make sure that you've got your current staff registered for that list, and you do that through our website, and that link is here. This is just another resource that really compiles in one document tons of different guidance and resources. And then I just wanted to go through quickly for the things that we haven't covered already, places where you guys can find more information. So if you are new to the CoC and like you're looking at me like I have 8 heads because you have no idea what I'm talking about today because this is all brand new to you, please go to our website and check out the Introduction to the CT Boss CoC webinar. That will help orient you and introduce some of the terms and concepts that we're talking about today. We are going to be doing that website again live for folks. So that webinar again live for folks. So that's going to happen in March. We don't have that scheduled yet, but we'll get it out as soon as we have it scheduled. And in the meantime, last year's version is up on the website. We have done periodically like soup to nuts compliance training where we, over the course of several days, go through like all of the requirements. Those materials are up on our website. I think we're thinking that it's more helpful. Like it's so overwhelming when we do that. It's so much information for you guys all in one sitting. We're thinking that moving forward, what we're going to do is more kind of like snippets, right? We'll do a topic and then we'll put that topic on the website so that way you don't have to commit to like 4 whole days or 3 whole days of training. You can just find the information that you want on that topic. So you guys should tell us whether that sounds good to you or not. Put it in chat or call or email us. So, and then these are just the resources that are up on the links to the resources that are up on our page for the YHDP projects. These are the links to resources if you are a rapid rehousing project. We've got the policies that you're required to follow as a rapid rehousing project. So it's called the Rapid Rehousing Model Guidelines. And then there also, if you are a DOH rapid rehousing project, which most of you are, if you're rapid rehousing at all, there's a whole set of forms that DOH requires, and those are all in one place on the CCEH website, and that link is here. And then if you are a DEMIS Continuum of Care Rental Assistance Program, I talked before about the operations guide, so that's a really helpful resource. We hope that sort of compiles everything into one document, so the link to that is here. We also did an entire webinar last year when we launched the operations guide, so that might be useful for you to look at. And as similar to what I just said for the DOH rapid rehousing programs, the DEMIS CoC rental assistance programs are also required to use certain forms, and all of those forms are up in one place on our website. And thank you to Shannon and Lisa Callahan at DEMIS for keeping that list of forms current. So please check that out if you're not already familiar with it. So finally, we've got about 5 minutes left. I wanted to talk about HUD monitoring. So So similar to how we do monitoring, right? It shouldn't be a surprise what HUD is going to monitor you on, right? So similar to our CoC monitoring guide, HUD has what they call their monitoring exhibits, right? So if you click on this link, it'll show you what all of the things are possible that HUD could monitor you on. I find this document a little not so user-friendly, but if you like this kind of thing, feel free to take a look at it. I think what's probably more useful to me than just going in and looking at that whole entire HUD exhibit, which I think is pretty overwhelming, is if you get a notice, so HUD will do the same thing that we do, right? If they're gonna monitor you, they'll send you a letter saying, we're gonna come and monitor you. And when HUD monitors, I mentioned this before, they typically don't monitor on every single area of compliance, right? They're gonna select a few of these areas. So this slide shows you all of the possible things that HUD could monitor you on. But when they send you that letter, they say which of these things they're going to monitor you on, right? Which is super helpful because then you can go to the monitoring exhibit and you can just look at those things that they're going to monitor you on. And you're basically going to know exactly what they're going to be looking for, right? So, and also you can always call us if you have questions. We're prior to HUD monitoring, we're happy to answer any questions that you guys have. So sorry for the speed talking. I did want to just have a few minutes to see if we can get through. Actually, first, before I do that, I want to invite people, if you've got suggestions for us for how we can make this more helpful, easier for you guys, new trainings that you need, tools you need, please speak up now. We'd love to hear your suggestions. You can also put them in chat. All right, so if you think of things after today, please call or email us. And then I'm gonna use the last 2 minutes here to try to answer some of the questions that are in chat. Before I do that, here's the contact information for Shannon and I. So please reach out to us. And we've got Alice in the chat box has said that she's a huge cheerleader for the operations guide. So she's really encouraging you, if you are a DEMIS CoC rental assistance project and are not already familiar with that guide, please take a look at it. And then Alice also, go ahead.
I think Alice might have something to say.
You want to say something else?
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to say that there's a ton of information in the operations guide. And if you have questions, to probably go there first rather than contacting Housing Innovations or somebody at DEMIS, because the answers are probably in there, and you can look at the guide quickly, get your answer, and not have to write an email and wait for somebody to get back or make a phone call. So I'm just a huge cheerleader. There's been so much work put into the operations guide, and it's all there for your knowledge.
Thank you, Alice. Also, somebody asked a question in the chat that I think is a great question, and I want to share the answer that Alice put in the chat with everyone. So the question is like, what's the difference between the monitoring that HI does and the quality initiative? I have no words, Alice. What do they call it? Those visits that they do?
The quality initiative, the quality assurance initiative.
Okay. So the thing that CSH does when they come monitor you, and basically it's like the primary focus of what we do is looking at all of this compliance stuff, like all of these rules and regulations, and that is not the primary focus of the QI visits, right? The QI visits, their primary focus is on the services, right? And these different requirements that are a part of that tool that they have developed with DEMIS that outlines all of the standards for services. And we've aligned, so we did a couple years ago, did an alignment to make sure that where there was any overlap, we were asking you guys for the same things, right? That there weren't conflicting requirements across the two processes. But for the most part, the things that we're looking at are very different. It's almost entirely a different set of things that we look at and that they look at. So I know there are a couple of questions in the chat box that we didn't get to, but we are at the end of our time together. So we're going to invite everybody that wants to hop off. We thank you for joining today. Don't hesitate to reach out with questions, and if you'd like to stay on, please do. And I am happy to answer questions that we didn't get to. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.